I was here a month ago, sitting in the corner, and no one served me, she began, looking me in the eye. I saw your staff running around white tourists, and I was ignored, she added, and I felt the blood rush to my face. That's when I decided to come back, to see if anything had changed after your new rules, she continued, pointing to the sign at the entrance. At the end of the story, leave your opinion below, and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll continue. The rumors had reached me, and they stung like a splinter I couldn't get out. I decided to check it out for myself, no warning, no noise, just walked into my own cafe as if I were a stranger. My name is Leah Vega. I'm 34 years old. I live in San Elias, a small town on the California coast, where the waves are loud and tourists crowd the streets for half the year. That morning, I stood at the entrance to my cafe, Bright Coast, clutching a coffee in my hand from a gas station nearby. I was wearing nothing of the sort, no expensive coat, no folder under my arm, just a gray sweatshirt, old sneakers, and my hair pulled back into a sloppy bun. I wanted to look inconspicuous. This place was mine. Well, mine and my grandmother's dream. She started with one little diner, serving pancakes and coffee to the locals. Now we have 3 locations, and this one, right off Main Street, was the busiest. But lately I've been hearing things. People complained about being greeted coldly. The reviews said the service was bad. It was bugging me. A lot. So I thought I'd come in, pretend I was just a visitor, see what was going on. I pushed the door open and walked in. The bell jingled as usual, but no one even looked up. Inside smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon buns, my recipes I'd spent years perfecting. I took a deep breath and looked around. The cafe was crowded, but not crowded. 2 old men sat at the counter, drinking coffee and arguing about fishing. In the corner by the window was a mom with 2 kids. Her baby was smearing ketchup on the table. I shoved my hands in my pockets and walked to the empty table at the far end, trying not to attract attention. The coffee in my hand was still warm, but I set it down on the table. I decided to order something, see how it went. I sat and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. No one came up. I noticed Marina, one of the waitresses, walking by with a tray. Skinny girl with a nose piercing, always chewing gum, so loud you could hear her across the room. I hired her myself 6 months ago, thought she was fast. She didn't even look in my direction. I caught her eye for a second and waved my hand just a little. Hey, can I get some water? I asked quietly, calmly. She almost didn't stop. Yeah, now, wait a minute, she tossed and walked further to the counter. I saw her lean there and start chatting with Raul, the second one on shift. He had tattoos all over his arms and a lazy gait, like he didn't care if he was in a hurry or not. They laughed about something, heads tilted toward each other, and my table remained empty. No water, no nothing. I squirmed in my chair, a knot tightening in my chest. Is this how things work for me now? My cafe, my rules, and they don't even bother to come over? I told myself to calm down. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they're having a rough day. But then I saw Marina take the picture and head across the hall to a table where 2 tourists with big sunglasses and loud voices were sitting. She smiled at them, all friendly. Here's some water for you, just poured. Can I get you anything else? She said, pouring slowly as if she was in no hurry. They smiled back, saying something about the pie, how much they liked it. She laughed, replied that it was her favorite too. And I sat and stared at my empty glass, my coffee getting cold. There weren't too many people to miss me. She saw me. She heard me. She just didn't care. It's all swirling around in my head. This is my cafe, my grandmother's business, my sleepless nights over the accounts, my everything. I built it to make people feel at home, to make them feel important here. I've always told the staff that every guest is like family. But sitting there, I didn't feel like family. I was like a ghost. I wondered how many other people had walked in here and gotten the same turnoff. Is it just me? Is it the sweatshirt? Or was it something else? I didn't know yet, but I certainly wasn't going to leave without figuring it out. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. I wanted to get up and walk over and ask what the hell was going on. But I didn't. For now. I needed to see more to be sure. So I stayed seated, watching the irritation boil up inside. My grandmother always said don't fix it until you know what's broken. Well, something was definitely broken. I could feel it. And I wasn't going to let it go. I settled down at a table by the window, determined to check it all out. The menu was in front of me. I'd made it myself a few years ago. I wanted to see how I would be greeted if I were just a visitor. Marina passed by again without even looking in my direction, though the room was half empty. I decided to ask for water to see how she would react to a simple request. I raised my hand and said, "Hey, can I have a glass of water, please, if it's not too much trouble?" She stopped for a second, looked at me with slight irritation in her eyes. "Yeah, I'll get it right away. Just wait a bit. I'm busy with other things," she replied, clearly not intending to hurry. Then she turned and walked away to the counter, where Raoul was twirling a rag in his hands. They started whispering, glancing in my direction, and I felt a chill run down my spine. 10 minutes passed, and still no water, though I sat patiently. I saw Marina chatting with Raoul, as if I didn't exist at all. Then two people came into the cafe, a white guy and a girl, both wearing brightly colored jackets. They said hello loudly, and Marina immediately perked up, as if a light had been turned on. "Hi guys, welcome. Sit anywhere. I'll bring everything right away," she said, smiling like they were her old friends. She grabbed a pitcher of water and ran to their table without even looking back. I watched as she poured them water, laughing at their jokes, sliding the menus over. My glass was still empty. I clutched the menu in my hands, trying to figure out why this was happening to me. Was it because I didn't look like these tourists? My skin is a little darker, my hair is black, and my clothes are simple. Maybe that's it? I remember my grandmother telling me about the times she wasn't allowed to go to certain places. She had said that people judged by what they saw without thinking about the soul. I didn't want to believe that the same thing was happening in my cafe. But there I sat, and Marina served those two people as if I were an empty seat. Raoul passed by, too, tossing me a napkin without even saying a word. I thought maybe I was overreacting, getting myself worked up for no reason. But then I heard Marina say to Raoul, "That one in the sweatshirt wants something again." They laughed, and I realized it wasn't just laziness or fatigue. I wasn't just forgotten. I was chosen to be ignored because I didn't fit into their picture. The tourists got water, smiles, attention, and I sat with an empty table and a heavy heart. I knew this was just the beginning, and I needed to dig deeper. I decided not to give up and check things out one more time to make sure definitively. I got up from my chair and headed over to the counter where Marina was cleaning the coffee machine. I wanted to ask about apple pie, a recipe I'd made up a long time ago. I came closer and said, "Listen, can you tell me what goes into an apple pie, if it's not too much trouble?" She looked up, looked at me with a look as if I had distracted her from something important. "It's all written on the menu. Take it and read it yourself. Nothing complicated there," she mumbled, rolling her eyes, and turned back away. I stood there, feeling my insides clench, but didn't have time to respond. At that moment, the door opened, and a guy in a bright green jacket walked in, clearly not from around here. Marina immediately straightened up, smiled at him, and said, "Oh, hi, this pie is our hit. Do you want to try a slice?" I stepped back to the window, trying not to show how hurt I was, but my heart was pounding. I watched her run around this guy, like he was some special guest. He asked about the same pie, and she started describing how delicious it was. "It's got fresh apples, a little cinnamon. The dough is so tender, you're sure to love it," she chirped, almost winking at him. And she just told me to read the menu, like I wasn't worth her time. Then Raoul came out of the back room, spotted the guy, and immediately jumped up with napkins in hand. "Here you go, bro. If you need anything, just say the word. We're here for you," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. He walked past me, without even a glance, even though I was standing 2 feet away from the counter. I clenched my fists in my pockets, realizing that this was no longer an accident, but something more. My mind was spinning. Why do they treat me like this, and him differently? I wasn't wearing a fancy jacket, I didn't talk loudly, and my skin was darker than theirs. Maybe they figured I wouldn't pay, or leave a tip, because of the way I looked. I remembered how once in school a teacher missed my question, and the white girl answered it right away. At the time, I thought it was a small thing, but now it all came together in one picture. My grandmother had warned me that people often judge by the wrapper, not the substance. I looked at Marina and Raoul, and it was clear to me that they had chosen who to help. I went back to my table, but I couldn't just sit and be quiet inside anymore. That guy in the jacket had gotten everything, smiles, attention, even napkins, without asking. And I, the hostess of the place, stood there empty-handed and feeling like I'd been left out. I knew it wasn't just a bad day, it was a habit, and it pissed me off. I was sitting in the corner of the cafe, watching everything. Marina and Raoul were cleaning the tables, chatting among themselves, and I heard their words. They were laughing at the boring guests who were always asking for something and taking nothing. I realized that by boring, they meant people like me, the inconspicuous ones. This was my cafe, my dream, and they were turning it into someone else's place. I watched them wiping down the tables without noticing me, and everything was boiling inside. I was reminded of my grandmother talking about the times when she was chased out of stores. She said that people see the color of your skin and immediately decide who you are. I didn't want to believe it was happening here, but the proof was in front of me. Marina threw the rag on the counter and said to Raul, "That one in the hoodie was staring again." They both laughed, like I was a joke and not a person with feelings and rights. I noticed them perk up when a white woman walked in with an expensive shoulder bag. Raul immediately jumped up to move her chair, and Marina offered the menu with a smile. "If you need anything, just say the word. We always welcome guests," she said, almost bowing. I sat on the sidelines with a cold coffee I hadn't finished and an empty glass. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being left out because I didn't look like a proper visitor. I thought about my childhood, when I'd been teased for my dark skin and curly hair. I'd learned to hold my head up then, but it hit me harder now because it was my place. I'd put everything into Bright Coast, money, time, soul, to make people feel at home. And they decided that people like me weren't worth paying attention to unless they sparkled with whiteness or money. I stood up, dropping my coffee on the table, and realized I couldn't keep quiet and pretend anymore. My resolve grew with every second as I stared at their indifferent faces. I left the cafe, feeling resentment replace something hard, almost angry inside me. I decided to come back later, not as a guest, but as the one in charge. They thought they could judge me by my hoodie and skin color, but I was going to show them the truth. My grandmother taught me that you can't let people trample on your dignity, and I wasn't about to. I knew it wasn't just about poor service, it was about who I was to them. And I was going to make them see that they were wrong, badly wrong. I returned to the cafe in the evening, ready to put an end to this masquerade once and for all. I was wearing a strict coat, holding a folder of papers in my hands to look serious. Once inside, I noticed Marina and Raul were silent when they saw me at the counter. They looked at each other, as if they sensed something was wrong, but didn't understand what it was. I stepped closer and asked coldly, "Where's the shift supervisor around here? I need to talk to him." Raul stepped forward, rubbing his neck, and said, "It's me. What's up? What's wrong?" I pulled a business card out of my pocket and placed it on the counter in front of them. "My name is Leah Vega. I own Bright Coast. This is my cafe," I said, looking them straight in the eye. Their faces turned pale, as if they had seen a ghost rather than a living person in front of them. Marina opened her mouth, but couldn't get out a word, only blinked rapidly. Raul coughed and muttered, "Wait, are you serious? Is this for real? You're not kidding?" I didn't waste time with their confusion, and began to speak calmly, but firmly. "I was here this morning, sitting in a sweatshirt, asking for water, and help with the menu," I said, watching their reactions. "You both looked at me like I was nothing, didn't even try to help," I added, remembering their chuckles. "And then the others came in, the white ones with the brightly colored jackets, and you ran around them like they were important," I continued, feeling the resentment rising up inside again. I saw Marina lower her gaze, and Raul began to shift from foot to foot. "Is this what I taught you when I hired you to work here?" I asked, not raising my voice, but with iron in my tone. They were silent, and I knew they realized how badly they'd screwed up in that moment. I remembered how they smiled at the tourists and waved me off like I wasn't worth their time. It wasn't just about laziness, it was about how I meant less to them because of my skin. My grandmother told me how she'd been kicked out of a cafe for the same thing, and here it was again. "You thought I was nobody because I didn't look like your good guests," I said, looking at Raul, who tried to object something. "No need to make excuses. I've seen you choose who to help and who not to," I interrupted him, feeling the power in my words. They knew I was right, and their shock was mixed with the fear that I might fire them. I stood straight without taking my eyes off them, and realized that now they were seeing me for real. After everything was revealed, I decided to talk to Marina one-on-one. We sat down in the empty hall after closing time, when all the guests had gone home. I looked at her, and I said, "I know what it's like to be a waitress. I've been behind the counter myself." She sat across from me, rubbing the edge of her apron, and didn't look up at me. "I had 2 jobs, I was tired, I met rude people every day," I continued, remembering those hard years. "But I never decided who was worthy of attention and who wasn't, you know?" I asked, trying to speak softer but with hardness inside. Marina blushed and muttered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, I really didn't." I could see she was confused, but I needed to get the point across. "You looked at me this morning, and all you saw was a hoodie and dark skin," I said, watching her flinch. "And then the white tourists would come in, and you'd run around them with smiles," I added, remembering their laughter. "This place is for everyone, or it's not worth anything at all, okay?" I asked, putting my hand on the table to emphasize my words. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and said, I didn't realize it looked like that from the outside. Her voice shook, and I realized she was starting to realize something, albeit slowly. I thought about how often people like me face this attitude. My grandmother used to tell me how she wasn't allowed into a coffee shop because she wasn't white. I didn't want anyone in my bright coast to feel like an outsider because of that. You said sometimes people are just wasting your time, hanging around. I reminded her of the words I'd heard her say this morning. But you can't guess who will pay and who won't by the look of them, I said, looking her straight in the face. She nodded again and added, I realize I really made a mistake. I'm embarrassed now. I didn't yell, I didn't get angry, but it still hurt inside from what had happened. When you choose who to help, you're not just being lazy, you're being judgmental, I said, remembering her indifference to me. And if it's because of the way I look, that's even worse, I added, feeling old resentments resurface. Marina looked at me and said, I didn't want you to think it was because of the color of your skin. But I knew it was, even if she didn't fully understand it herself. A week after that scene, I gathered all the staff at the cafe for a meeting. We were standing in the hall before the opening, and I wanted to set the record straight. Raul came forward and said, I want to apologize to you for being wrong. He spoke softly, but I could see he was having a hard time admitting his mistake in front of everyone. I disrespected some of the guests, and that was stupid of me, he added, looking at the floor and then at his co-workers. I stood back, holding my cup of tea, and felt the tension inside me release. He didn't make excuses, didn't blame it on others, and that was important to me. I decided to introduce a new rule so that no one would forget why we work here. I put a sign at the entrance that read, Every guest is part of our family, no exceptions. This was my response to the way I was greeted that day in my sweatshirt. I remember Marina and Raul looking past me because I was not a white tourist. My grandmother had experienced the same thing, and I didn't want it to happen again at my cafe. We don't choose who we help by skin color or clothing, I told the team as everyone gathered around me. They nodded, and I could see that some hesitated as they looked at the sign by the door. Marina was now working with our senior waitress, learning to greet people without prejudice. I noticed how she approached a table with an elderly couple and smiled sincerely at them. Here's your menu if you need anything. Just say the word, I'm here for you, she said, and I was relieved. She was no longer casting glances around to assess who was in front of her, and that was progress. I stood at the window, looking out over the hall, and thought about how long racism had lived unnoticed in my case. I was ignored for a reason, but because I didn't fit into their expectations. I knew that not everyone would change right away, but it was a start, and that made me feel better. Clients came in, read the sign, and some smiled as if they understood its meaning. One day a woman came up to me and said, Thank you for making me feel at home here. Her skin was darker than mine, and I realized she might have been going through the same thing I was. That's the purpose of this place, to make everyone feel needed, I replied, looking into her eyes with warmth. I no longer feared for my cafe. It was starting to get back to what I had envisioned. It had been a month since that meeting, and I thought things were finally getting better at the cafe. I was standing at the counter checking orders when I noticed a new customer at the entrance. She was a woman in her 50s, dark-skinned, wearing a simple jacket and a tired look. She walked in, looked at the sign that read, Every guest is part of our family, and smiled slightly. I decided to serve her myself, walked over and said, Welcome, sit wherever you want, what can I get you today? She looked at me, as if checking to see if I was being sincere, and replied quietly, Just coffee, black if you can, and a piece of apple pie, please, she said as she sat down by the window. I brought her order and noticed her watching Marina and Raul closely. They were working as usual, serving other guests, but I could see that she was watching them. After half an hour, she beckoned me over and said, You're the hostess, yes. I heard you talking to the staff? I nodded, not sure what she was getting at, and replied, Yes, this is my place. I'm Leah Vega. What can I do for you? She smiled wider and said, My name is Rita Jones. I'm from a local magazine. I write about business. My stomach clenched because I didn't expect anyone to be following us. I was here a month ago, sitting in the corner, and no one served me. She began looking me in the eye. I saw your staff running around white tourists, and I was ignored, she added, and I felt the blood rush to my face. That's when I decided to come back, to see if anything had changed after your new rules, she continued, pointing to the sign at the entrance. I remembered the day I was overlooked because of my hoodie and skin color, and realized she'd been through the same thing. Today, I was welcomed as a person, and I want to write about it in an article, she said, pulling a notepad out of her bag. I stood there not knowing what to say, because this was a twist I wasn't expecting. Your cafe could have remained a place where people are judged on looks, but you fixed that, Rita said, writing something down on paper. People need to know that racism lost here, thanks to you, and your struggle, she added, looking at me with respect. I felt pride mixed with relief because my work had been recognized. Thank you for coming back. I'm glad you felt at home, I replied, realizing that this was my true final. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up.